Hi everyone, it's Jen again. Hope you're all having a good week and enjoying this festive winter time of year. If you celebrate any holidays, hope that you enjoy that as well. The last couple weeks I've been working on Chapter 5. I have been struggling with some vague cold-like illness, so I apologize in advance if there's some kind of coughing or awkward edits in here of me trying to cut that out. I've been re-recording and starting over, and it doesn't seem like I can make any progress in what I'm trying to say without some form of interruption. So, what I want to talk about this week is about some things I've been learning as I've been working through Allele. So with Allele, I have been kind of going back to just making what I would consider to be more of a traditional, sort of bare bones visual novel. I have been enjoying incorporating gameplay elements to my games. I think with EXG I might have gone a little ham. And so this is my way, I guess, of kind of backpedaling a little bit, going back to my roots, and really focusing on the story, the narrative, the decision making, making that my priority, and any type of gameplay mechanics is just kind of choice based on stats, and around the whole idea of increasing the sense of tension or danger, survival element of the story, since it is a darker kind of horror story, where I want the player to have a sense of caution or dread as they're going through the story. And this is not an easy kind of atmosphere that I have experience exploring, so it's been a very interesting challenge from a writing standpoint. Some of the things that I have realized as a kind of by your pants writer who's essentially making things up as I go along, because this is a hobby and something I do for relaxation, and I really enjoy exploring characters, and I never really fully explore a character until I start writing them. That's I can have all the plans in the world, and those plans always seem to go awry once I start writing the story and the characters just kind of take over. I kind of let them have the wheel, and I think that's one of the advantages I have as a solo developer that you don't get in a more team environment where you have to have more organization and more accountability to your team to kind of follow the plan, the prescription. Otherwise, it might mess up somebody else's progress in some point of the process. So I like to really just to kind of let the story take its own shape, and I'm just here to facilitate that. So when I've been writing Allele, one of the things that has been very different for me, as opposed to writing Arcane Dice Wars, is that most of my work is very character-centric. It really revolves around the characters' motivations, the characters' growth and development, and so I only really have to have a very vague outline of what happens, and then the characters just kind of develop, and the story just kind of unfolds around their motivations and the whatever very broad, overarching events in the world that are taking place, how they react to it, how they grow, how they develop when they form a relationship with the main character. This is more than enough material for me to build an entire 360,000 words around, apparently, in Arcane Dice Wars. And still had plenty of room to make side games with that. So Allele has been different because one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I continued with as the story progressed is that I didn't want the game to lose its sense of atmosphere and identity as the characters kind of developed and bonded with the main character. So one of the challenges that then raised is that how do I still have that sense of urgency, that high stakes, that danger element of these bad endings, so to speak, of where the the main character, makes the wrong choice, like that sense of kind of urgency and gravity, the weight of their decisions adding up to potentially stumbling and falling and reaching that bad end. And I wanted to continuously have these bad ends in there also to kind of show other facets of the characters and reveal some of the lore through those bad endings as well. So one of the things that, with these more morally gray villainous characters, they, in my mind, when I'm creating them and I'm trying to give them some form of logical consistency, give them some motivations that make sense in my head, but also make them have a relationship or personality development that I feel like, I don't know, I would say is a redemption arc, but at least makes them more sympathetic, is that as the main character progresses through the story and starts to develop a bond with these characters, they're not, in my mind, going to be as likely to just unalive them, as they would in the beginning of the story when they don't have any attachment or any knowledge of the protagonist, and maybe their first tool in their tool set is a blunt hammer that they just bang in all the nails. Well, now the nail has a personality and they've developed a fondness and affection for that nail, then they're not as likely to just smash it into the wood, right? So then where do I still maintain that sense of danger if the main character is starting to develop some trust and bond with the different main love interest in that route? Is that then I have made more of an external conflict for the main character to be able to continue creating that bond through this kind of shared survival with their chosen love interest in that path, and then this external danger element can then still maintain that sense of dread that I'm trying to keep in this story as a survival horror subgenre. So some of the scenarios that I feel like that I've been putting in this story are a little bit more deliberate than just letting the characters run wild, because I need to kind of maintain that sense of there being these bad endings. So that's that's one of my parameters in every chapter of every route, is I want there to be at least one bad ending, if not multiple bad endings, so that the player can discover those, maybe find something a little bit fascinating. Hopefully that little bit of grisliness is part of the appeal of why they're reading this story in the first place, and I don't want it to lose its identity as you get into some of the more softer, more intimate interactions with the characters. And so there's that. And one of the let me backtrack for a moment. So this is kind of right here what my outline for a chapter might look like, and each chapter for each character, including all the different options and bad endings, is roughly around 10,000 words. I want to try to keep each route roughly about the same. So Isaac's route tends to be a little bit longer because in his route you have the castle and a lot of the world lore that you can explore, and a lot of that text is optional. But when it comes to the main non-optional parts of the story, his route is pretty much in line with the others. Okay, so this little paragraph is just kind of what I started with, that at the beginning of the chapter, Simon is going to be apologizing for basically trying to experiment on the protagonist, and he doesn't have a whole lot of resolve. He gave up kind of easily. And the main character is deciding whether or not they want to even accept this apology from Simon when there's a knock at the door, and it's Anthony. So Anthony is going to serve as now an external danger, now that the main character's kind of like formed at least enough trust with Simon that he's not going to immediately like turn around and backstab the main character again, because this is his route and we are trying to develop some kind of rapport with him. So when Anthony arrives, there's a knock at the door, and they're in the middle of like having that discussion, and he tells the main character to hide under the bed, and answers the door, and immediately there's something that feels a little bit off about Anthony. He's got kind of like a threatening presence, and so the main character, who didn't really have time to fully, you know, digest the situation, just kind of went along with hiding under the bed because they didn't have any better ideas. And now that they're under the bed, they get to overhear the conversation between Simon and Anthony, and they get to learn a lot more about what happened with the castle raid in chapter 3, and they get to see more of like what this coalition that Simon was a part of, that launched that castle raid against Isaac, why they're doing that, who the players might be involved in that. This coalition is very loose, that there's a lot of mistrust among the different players in this kind of group. And then Anthony kind of leaves, but he drops some hints that he sort of knows that Simon has somebody there, or is that something kind of seems a little off. And then originally in the story, Anthony was going to discover the player, or the main character, after all, and then they were going to become introduced, and then they were going to form like a kind of uneasy alliance with Anthony. But that's not what ended up happening, because as I started writing the scenario out where Simon and Anthony were talking and the main character was just kind of like overhearing the conversation, it seemed really boring. Like, I wanted there to be a sense of tension and danger, that like we don't trust Anthony's a little bit scary, but it just kind of felt like two chummy, you know, friends just kind of like bickering, and then you're just kind of there as like a third party, and it didn't have that sense of tension that I wanted at all. So what I ended up deciding to do, and this is one of the great things about it being a visual novel, is that I can implement choice, is I decided to make the player have a little bit more active choice even though they couldn't participate in the conversation. I decided to make it a little bit of a mini game where the character under the bed is trying to not be detected, and so I made this this little breathing mechanic. Let's go into the game here, where there's like the objective is to hold your breath as much as possible and try to avoid detection. So originally this was just like the player choices. Okay, so Anthony's here. He's talking to Simon. And then periodically through the conversation, the player is given the choice to hold their breath or breathe quietly. So when you hold your breath, it brings up this breath meter, and you only have the chance to hold your breath 3 times before your character almost passes out, and then they kind of give themselves away and you go to a bad end. We go ahead and skip through some of this more stuff. So we get the hold your breath option again. If you decide to breathe quietly, your breath meter goes down, but then your detection meter goes up. And so the idea is that we want to manage these 2 bars and keep them from going over and reaching a bad end while the characters are discussing and you're learning a little bit about this lore and about these characters that you wouldn't get from interacting with them individually, because they are a little bit sneaky. They're not completely forthright with what they're trying to do and who they are. So this interaction kind of shows you a different side of them that they weren't showing the main character. And it was a way to sort of maintain the tension by making the player feel like they have some kind of like input or control or thing that they need to be concerned about outside of just reading this conversation like you are just a fly on the wall. So, and it also gave me an opportunity to implement some bad ends to maintain the survival aspect of the story. So I wouldn't say that this mechanic is very difficult. Originally, I just had the player choose whether or not they wanted to breathe or hold their breath. I didn't even have these bars here because it seems so simple to be like, oh, well, if you choose 3 in a row, then you're dead. If you choose to breathe twice in a row, then you're dead. So you gotta not use that option as much as possible. But having these bars here, I think, makes it more transparent for the player so that they don't have to sit there with as much trial and error and feel any frustration. They're like, okay, I can see the results of my action, and I can make my next decision based on these bars and the subtext that I'm getting from this story. I'm quite happy with how that changed the course of that interaction, kind of maintained that atmosphere that I was trying to create with this story being darker. It did end up kind of ruining my plans, because then what would be the point of Anthony discovering the player character if then they don't get unalived? Then what's the point of like being so cautious and like going through all the trouble of like not being detected if then he's just going to detect you and you guys are all going to get along? So this is going to change the course of chapter 6, because I decided, no, let's keep Anthony as the external threat. Let's not make them cooperate or have this kind of like loose alliance that will then later be backstabbed or whatever. Let's just keep him that external threat, and then I can keep using him and Isaac within Simon's route as those danger points. Okay, well, I am really struggling to get through this video as I keep coughing and my nose is running, and here I go again. So I'm going to end it here. Hope you all have a good upcoming week. Hope you can enjoy some of the holidays. And as always, if you're working on something, don't forget to enjoy the process. Take care. Bye-bye.